I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome to On Watch, everybody, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we go behind the headlines to report on news and information that the old legacy media really does not want you to know about, where we try to recover some lost history and explain the inexplicable. Today, to help us explaining the inexplicable, we're very lucky to have with us Scott Walter, who's the president of the Capital Research Center. Welcome, Scott.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Today, I want to talk about a topic that you and I have enjoyed discussing briefly before we turned on the cameras, and that is Doge and the Doge files, the Department of Government Efficiency, and what Elon Musk and his merry band of investigators have been uncovering. For those folks that are not aware or up to speed, give us a little quick overview on Capital Research Center and the work that your folks have been doing with regard to the Doge files.
Sure, Chris. The Capital Research Center exists to investigate special interests. We especially investigate the left deeply and expose it widely because, as you know, our wonderful mainstream media friends are not very good about that.
Not in the least.
So what we feel is these are that the lefty groups therefore are underdogs in a sense because they're not receiving the kind of attention that they deserve. So that is something that we have done literally for decades at this point. Right. And we are thrilled because we have built up this expertise in these left-wing groups. So we were thrilled and began working even before the administration began. We began working on helping Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, specifically at thedogefiles.org. There's a lot there already, and there'll be a lot more week by week, but we are doing deep dives into the major federal agencies, especially looking at their grants to outside groups.
I mean, to sum it up, really, Capital Research Center was Doge before Doge. You guys were doing those sorts of audits and investigations and reviews and walking back where money was going for decades, like you said. So you were Doging before Doge. You got to really be thrilled. You've got to be heartened by these developments. At the top level, what are some things that you've seen come out in the last couple of weeks that you think is really remarkable or refreshing?
Well, in general, I love that USAID was one of the very first specimens on the dissection table.
Right.
It is one of the worst things in town, notorious to anybody who's actually paying close attention. It also is a very smart, they need good PR because the mainstream media is going to be against them and Congress is going to be against them. And most of the people working at all the federal agencies are going to be against them.
Right.
So it's very smart to pick a fight with a really dirty agency that gives money to foreigners. Not many Americans are thrilled about money to foreigners.
And some of these things are not just, I mean, the claim will be, oh, you're stealing medicine from sick children in the developing world. That isn't an accurate representation because an awful lot of it is really kind of just squandered. It's thrown around loosely. It's an extraordinary example, but it's an example. Transgender ballroom dancing in Peru. What are we doing sending even a penny to support that kind of stuff? That's crazy. I understand the critique from the left, oh, you're stealing medicine from starving children. I don't think that's entirely true, but that's the claim. So differentiate for us. What stuff is just ridiculously throwing money out the window? And what stuff probably needs a hard look but may merit some kind of continuation? Is there some balancing in there?
Well, the short answer is that there always is some good. First of all, it's hard to spend billions and billions of dollars and do no good.
Right.
But it isn't just that, oh, there's a little bit on the side, like anybody's household budget. Well, you could spend a little bit less on this or that. Or you could go out a little less in the month, whatever. But the really important thing is to understand the dynamic. The way the dynamics work here is, it is the garbage that crowds out the good stuff, right? If they weren't obsessed with transgender issues around the world, maybe they would think more about medicine for sick children, right? I mean, you're not the political hobby horses. Plus, the other thing too is it isn't just as far as the subject matter of where the money's going. It's also the grantees where it's going, right? I mean, let's be brutally honest. What the Democrats do when they're in power is feed their entire left-wing infrastructure. All kinds of lefty groups get massive amounts of these federal subsidies, and I would ask any lefties in the audience to try to contemplate, like, Judicial Watch. What if the Trump administration were giving millions of dollars to Judicial Watch,
right,
or the Heritage Foundation, or the National Rifle Association? People would not be happy about that. Well, that is exactly what happens on the other side.
That's really the gimmick. That's the scam in all of this, is that the left has been successful at using sort of the organs of the state as the funding mechanism to give money to their favorite front groups that then donate it back to them or pay contractors and vendors that happen to be other kind of lefty organizations. That's really the racket in all of this, isn't it?
It's one of the worst things. And by the way, you know, one of the shorthands for talking about groups like that are NGOs, right? Non-governmental organizations. But as we like to point out in many of our researches, you know, is it really a non-governmental organization if 90% of its funding comes from the government?
Right.
I'm not sure that is a non-government organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a subsidiary or an ancillary organization. It's a dotted line on the organization chart, and if the government money gets turned off, they cease to exist, and that's kind of the indicator of the non-part of that expression really doesn't apply.
Exactly, and again, I'm totally happy to let democracy work, to let do most Americans think we need to be spending billions on foreign aid? Well, no, they don't. Do most Americans think that you are a charity if you actually get all your money from the government? I'm happy to let the democratic process and the American people's views hold.
A few years ago, George Soros took $18 billion, with a B, dollars of his personal wealth and dumped it into open society foundations to help capitalize and operate that enormous organization. But Open Society Foundations has quite a number of arms and legs and appendages in USAID, does it not?
Yes, and that is something that, again, we've been reporting on for years, because it wasn't the Biden administration who started that. It was the Obama administration that really revved that up. And so, yes, you have, again, something I don't think many Americans would approve of, our government subsidizing Soros's enormous network all over the world. I mean, it's hard to believe that a man like Soros has time to worry about Macedonia and whatnot, but by God, the Soros apparatchiks are working hard to take over Macedonia and Romania and countless other countries.
Yeah, there's been a number of people, commentators, analysts who have looked at this, and some have a more, I guess, sinister or maybe a more cynical view of USAID's operations, and they see a number of them as essentially being sort of fronts for intelligence operations, for influence operations politically, to either destabilize or overthrow certain governments, to run active opposition campaigns against governments, some of which are actually allied to us. But it's an effort to manipulate politically what's supposed to be some sort of charitable aid group. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You know, I mean, again, anyone who's been paying attention has known that, and all that we're finding out now is just simply more evidence of that. I would add that, you know, the Soros leaks that came out, probably thanks to Russian intelligence, but they also leaked out conservative groups' things as well. The Soros leaks show shocking things where the U.S. Soros foundations are saying things like, we're going to give money to this group in this little European country so that it will elect left-wing people to the European Union, for instance,
right.
European Parliament. So now, by the way, that's wildly illegal. A U.S. foundation cannot intentionally spend money to elect anybody in the United States or in any other country,
especially taxpayer money, right?
Yeah, and now you're getting the taxpayers in on it, yeah. And again, as you say, often against the regimes that we're supposedly allied with.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind, you mentioned Macedonia, a tiny little country. I know that enormous amounts of money were pumped into that country. I think the estimate was something like they had spent upwards of $300 per voter in an effort to sway the outcome of an election. And I don't know, I think most Americans would say, hold on a second. First of all, what are we doing even getting involved in Macedonia's elections to begin with, let alone kind of laundering money through a government agency to some outside group that then was purchasing services to influence an election. This is such a cobweb of weird connections and kind of filtering money around. Is that really what our foreign aid is supposed to be doing?
Well, again, I'm happy to leave that answer to the American people because I think I know what it is. And by the way, let me applaud Judicial Watch's work over the years because, again, those of us who are paying attention to these things, who are looking into government,
right,
have known these horrors that now are finally making it into the broader consciousness. Judicial Watch has done interesting work on Soros's misdeeds in Latin America.
Sure.
I have had Guatemalan journalists coming to me pleading, please help us fight the Soros machine in Guatemala.
I had the president of Guatemala say to me, eyeball to eyeball. I mean, literally he did. So, but it's not just USAID, right? There are other agencies and departments that Doge is going to go into. What else should folks know about, and what should they be looking forward to as these next few months, unfold? Where do you think Doge is going to have maximum impact?
Well, I'm not smart enough to know the maximum impact, but I am happy to touch on some of the departments we've already taken a deep dive into. And,
sure.
So, by the way, people forget the State Department is not much better than USAID, really. There's similar kind of atrocities there. And plus, by the way, I have read the JFK executive order that created USAID. And, of course, he created it as part of the State Department, and now people are acting like it would be a cosmic injustice if it were returned to the State Department.
Yeah, it's always very curious how the people on the left, in the phony media, will talk about various government agencies and departments as though they're independent, that they don't belong to the executive in some way. Oh, the Justice Department's independent. No, it's not. It's part of the executive branch of government, just as USAID is a subsidiary of the State Department. It's its own agency, but it belongs to someone. It's not just kind of free-floating.
Well, you can't beat the judge here in D.C. who, not long ago, trying to stop Doge, said that only unelected bureaucrats may touch certain computer systems and not political appointees.
Right, the people that were actually elected
are responsible to the electorate. Yes, right, that was breathtaking. But yes, that's the horrible mindset. But another favorite thing of mine is, again, you're going to hear sob stories in the media about, oh, you're taking the drugs from starving children in Africa or whatnot. Let's look at the EPA, right? Because remember, the climate hysteria was a central part of the last administration, and tons, billions and billions of money at EPA is supposedly going to help low-income communities, right? There's a huge amount that are supposedly focused on those low-income communities. But of course, it's for climate craziness, which is to say, the very thing that it makes, a poor person in California is enormously burdened. Not the mega donors in Silicon Valley or Malibu, but the actual poor people in California are currently suffering under electricity prices triple that of neighboring Arizona and Nevada because of lunatic climate policies. And the EPA is only throwing more weight onto the backs of those poor people with the ridiculous climate policies. Plus, of course, they're not even accomplishing the things that they say they're going to accomplish any more than the famous program. We're going to have EV chargers all over America, and they put billions into it, and then there are hardly any EV chargers for the billions.
I mean, it's largely science fiction, and if you say that, of course, you've committed heresy. I'm sure that I've offended all sorts of people but a lot of the green energy stuff, it's well-intentioned, and maybe one day somebody will figure out a way to get there. But it's science fiction. It's nonsense. And it's predicated on a lie to begin with. So, Lee Zeldin, the new EPA administrator, talked about something like $20 billion in some kind of a scam or fraud. Do you have any details on that?
Well, this is the thing, right? Some of the stuff is so stupid and bad that you can't have a direct grant to it, right? It's much safer to say, okay, we're going to create this, bank, quote unquote. It's not a real bank, but, a slush fund is. In Washington, what we call a bank in a government program is what other people call slush funds. So you create this slush fund, and then it's harder for folks like Judicial Watch and Capital Research Center to figure out exactly where that money is ending up.
Right.
But of course, what it's mainly ever going to fund is nutty advocacy for the exact policies that are crippling the household budgets of ordinary Californians, especially poor Californians, under green regulations, green nonsense. So, you see this over and over. Another thing like that, Department of Labor. It will shock you to learn that tons of the grants in the Department of Labor go to labor unions, and then also like labor union fronts, right? They have like Amalgamated Bank as a union front, and there are various 501c3 charities that are union fronts. A lot of that is for job training. Now, do I think that unemployed people should get job training? I think that's a wonderful idea. But I don't trust our bureaucrats and their labor cronies to do a good job of it. And that's another thing that Doge needs to be doing, is going around to these programs, spending the billions and saying, show me that you've made an American's life better.
Yeah.
How many Americans live better lives because of the billions that you spent?
Right.
And I'm confident that there are not going to be a lot of good answers for most of those programs.
So the Department of Education is another place that I think is going to get a lot of scrutiny. We spend enormous amounts of money, and we have horrible scoring, testing, evaluation, from kindergarten through university. We have just horrific levels of sort of professionally trained idiocy going on. And the kids, young people, suffer from it the most. What they're taught is garbage, and how they're being taught it is even, I guess, at a lower level. But the money that's poured into it is crazy. I think the DOD, I think the Pentagon is in for another real shocker. Everyone knows about kind of the Golden Fleece type awards that were given out just in the last Congress before this election. I think it was the current National Security Advisor, Mr. Waltz, was holding up a bag of screws or bolts or something, and it was, this is $30 at the hardware store, and for the Air Force it's $90,000 or something. Examples like that, I think, are going to be rife at the Pentagon. I know they've squandered money on DEI at the Pentagon. Do you have any other sort of insights?
They also, again, they've squandered money on climate stuff because, across the government, the climate idiocy goes everywhere. Yeah. And by the way, and the trans idiocy and whatnot. It's actually, for our researchers, it's a struggle to, we did do it, but it was a big struggle to try to figure out, like, what are the really silly, major silly trans things? Because so many grants, in the grant description, it'll throw in trans, even though they're not really doing anything for or about.
But they want to use that
thing.
word because they get more money.
Exactly, and it's the same with the climate. The climate's another magic rain-making word.
Yeah.
And the defense has been doing that for years. And again, for all of those on the left who do think that there's terrible, wasteful spending in the Defense Department, my question to them is simply, okay, I agree with you, but why do you suppose the largest single bureaucracy in the world has a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse? Maybe it's because giant bureaucracies always have waste, fraud, and abuse.
Right.
So why don't you open your minds to the idea that, yes, the Department of Education just might have waste, fraud, and abuse?
So a lot of guys, you see this sort of performance art out on the street. You have members of Congress running around having little protest events. They went to DOE, they went to USAID, they went to a few different places, and they stand outside and bang on the door and they pretend that they're outraged. That's the sort of pathetic acting out. Or they make references, they say that, Musk and the guys at Doge, that they're doing something illegal or unlawful. They're accessing information they're not supposed to have. Is any of that true?
Well, I can't say that I'm familiar with every single instance, right? So conceivably, there is some rule somewhere that was bent. But it's reassuring to see how smart the people behind Doge were. I know there were lefty groups that were, already, before the swearing-in day for Donald Trump, were planning legal strategies to try to stop Doge. And the legal strategies were critically dependent on this being some new thing that got concocted, or an outside advisory panel, or what, because there are all kinds of rules and this and that they could use to try to trip it up.
Right.
But instead, the Trump administration and the Musketeers simply repurposed an existing agency, the USDS, U.S. Digital Service, right, which was a relatively new entity that burst up under Obama to bring in a lot of left-wing tech people into the government to do bad things. A lot of horrible activists. Luke Rosiak has a great article on this in Daily Wire, and that tells the whole story. But because it was an existing agency, that meant that lots of things that they wouldn't otherwise have been allowed to do, they're entirely allowed to do. In fact, it's essentially it's a tech agency for the government. Well, Mr. Trump knows a little bit about tech, and so do those engineers that he's brought in. So it was, again, very savvy strategy, and makes you hopeful. Because, I mean, you and I have been in this town long enough. We've seen a lot of things like this. I can remember the Grace Commission, the Packard Commission, Clinton's efforts like this, Obama's, right? There have been many, many efforts. Not many have succeeded in chipping away at Leviathan.
So you mentioned on the left that people were kind of lining up and strategizing, trying to dream up ways to block or check any Trump initiatives. That stuff just doesn't happen by magic. That's not just, people sitting around thinking good and pure thoughts. This is an active work by people to organize and to plan and strategize, to develop legal theories, to draft briefs and complaints and those sorts of things. On the legal side, who is behind either funding or strategizing the left-wing legal attack on these Trump efforts?
The one that I would point to as the most important and probably the most legally sophisticated is something called Governing for Impact. And you can find all about them at our influencewatch.org website. You can because we discovered them. They first sprang up in 2019, and they started doing the sophisticated legal strategy memos you're talking about to try to undo all of the first Trump administration's regulatory reforms, like no boys and girls sports.
Right.
And they were highly successful.
Governing for Impact.
Governing for Impact. Now, before Trump could be inaugurated, however, they already were starting to put together memos to, one, try to fight the possibility of Doge even existing, to try to fight the efforts to impound unnecessary funds by the president, there's also the Schedule F reforms, the trying to reform the way government workers are hired and fired.
The civil service categories of employees.
Enormously important for beginning to rein in Leviathan, shrink government, and have more effective employees. They have very sophisticated memos already on all of those things, and it was the executive director has long been a Harvard law professor's daughter, law school daughter, lawyer daughter. It was funded entirely by Soros. It was, in fact, the head of his main foundation at the time, Tom Perriello, a failed Democrat congressman. He got it started when it was still in the total secrecy mode, and he did it through the Arabella Advisors network of dark money that I have a second edition of a book about to come out on.
Very good. Tell us about the first edition of the book so folks can track it down and get the
first edition was just called Arabella.
Okay.
And it's about the network of leftist billionaires secretly transforming America. And Arabella, most people have not even heard of it, but you've heard of its donors, right? Soros, Zuckerberg, Gates, Omidyar, Kaufman, on and on.
But there's only one billionaire that matters, Musk. Musk is the scary one,
yes,
right?
Yes.
That's the only one you're supposed to pay attention to now.
Yes.
And no other billionaires have ever had any involvement in government whatsoever.
No, like this, what we were talking about with USAID and the State Department, right? I mean, Soros would get invited to give talks at the D.C. State Department and at embassies around the world,
right?
Advancing his agenda, which is probably a little less popular with Americans than Mr. Musk's.
Right. So Arabella, for folks that are not familiar, what's a good sort of one or two sentence description of Arabella. What is Arabella?
Well, as I said, the network is the single best word. It is a for-profit company that runs a bunch of nonprofits, in-house nonprofits. And the way it works is the billionaires send the money to those nonprofits, which are then operated by Arabella to do the billionaires' bidding.
I see. So it's like a sort of an umbrella operation for other activist groups and organizations.
And what you see, they also are specialists in fiscal sponsorship. That means what we like to call fake groups, right? So you have Keep Iowan Healthy, right? And it sounds like that's a bunch of Iowans who got together trying to do something, right?
They're out exercising.
Yes. You know what it really is? It's just an accounting code at the for-profit Arabella Advisors, where the money came in through one of those semi-fake nonprofits, and then some guy here in a veal pen office, right, creates a website and buys some Facebook ads. And the guy who created the website, I would bet $100 he has never met an Iowan in his life.
Right. And the names, like you said, Iowans for health.
Keep Iowans healthy. Yeah. Oh, this will reassure your audience.
The Center for Goodness and Love.
Yeah. Secure Michigan elections.
Now.
Don't you feel good? Yeah. Don't you feel safe with that one?
Yeah. The names always crack me up. They have the loftiest terms. It's very funny. The sad part is that these people are deadly serious. I mean, they're very organized. They're very well funded. They've got a really rigid orthodoxy in their ideology of what they're going to go do. They're a threat. I mean, I view them.
Yes.
When Obama promised fundamental transformation, these are the people that delivered big time, right? And so now we're in the position where we have to kind of claw our way back to the Constitution. But these are the operatives that are the people that are implementing Obama's fundamental transformation. That's why the country is in the state that it's in today. All these characters you're talking about, they're the foot soldiers doing that. So it really is a grave threat. So there's lots of litigation. President Trump, to his credit, has executed all these executive orders, and there's been very rapid movement on a number of different fronts. Doge is obviously a part of that, going to these various agencies and departments. But across the country and here in D.C., there's these sort of Soros attorneys general and lefty governors and these, the Council for Everything That's Wonderful type groups that are out there, and they're all filing lawsuits like mad. What's your view of that process? What's going to happen? How is that going to play out?
I think that Pam Bondi is a great person to have in charge of DOJ. I know, given Judicial watches battles with DOJ over the years, I think probably a little nicer to have Ms. Bondi in there, and they seem to be pretty no-nonsense and tough. And I know, other lawyers in the government that'll be important. Mark Paletta is the general counsel for OMB, which oversees all regulatory changes and budget changes. Mark is a very sharp, gung-ho guy.
Absolutely.
I have great confidence in him.
Yep.
So, at the same time, you're right. I mean, especially where litigation is concerned, the left's money it's bottomless. It is just bottomless.
Yeah, because it's very disturbing. I know the average American, because I have non-DC friends and relatives who see that some judge in Rhode Island or out in California issued some order that shuts down everything. So do we have, I guess there's something like 650 Title III judges in the country, U.S. District Court judges. Do we have 650 precedents? Everybody gets to decide unilaterally and nationwide what the law is?
Well, it's above my pay grade to make too many predictions, but I know for a fact that Clarence Thomas, who is sort of the intellectual leader of the court at this point, Thomas has raised questions in the past about whether it is in fact legitimate for one district court judge to be ruling for the entire United States. And again, First of all, it doesn't sound very democratic when you put it that way, does it?
No, look, it's another government lawyer in a black robe, right? I mean, that's what it is. You can dress it up and call him Your Honor and all this. I have very low esteem for these people.
Especially after the Biden administration. I mean, some of the whack jobs that Biden. I mean, I was shocked, and I don't shock easily. My personal favorite was the fellow who was being grilled by Senator Cruz at his confirmation hearing, who admitted that he basically, he thought the Electoral College was simply illegitimate. Of course, it's in the Constitution, black and white.
Right.
And Cruz pushed him. You've even attacked the Senate, which, of course, to be fair, that is logical. If the Electoral College is improper, then the Senate must be improper too. And the guy didn't even really deny that. He's sitting in a Senate hearing room saying that the Senate is illegitimate, and if you let him stroke an order.
Right. And I mean, that's really the problem with a lot of these judges. I'm sure that some of them are brilliant. All right, there's my disclaimer. But an awful lot of them, I mean, the really, really very good, very sharp attorneys are frankly making too much money to leave their practice and take a government paycheck and go through all the garbage that judges have to go. So the top of the top, for the most part, are not interested. And so you really get this sort of middling mediocrity of semi-politically connected people who get these appointments. I know that's wildly unpopular to say and admit out loud, and I do so at my peril, I guess. But that's frankly what happens. And so they're not absolute morons because they couldn't get past where they are. But they're not necessarily the sharpest knives in the drawer, and many, 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 many of them are there because of political connections.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you trying to tell me that you don't think that when Sheldon Whitehouse got one of the top donors to the Democratic Party of his state on the federal bench, that was a pure meritocratic?
I mean, you're making my point, right? You're making my point. So when you have, that's our judiciary, right? There's some notable exceptions, but in large part, and so you have a president of the United States who gets elected by electoral majority and by a popular majority, and he's going to town doing what he's been elected to do, and there's all these district court judges who think that they personally can override on a nationwide basis anything they don't like, and they get to, I mean, one wonders, will they also have authority to control combatant commanders? Can they decide where airstrikes will occur? I mean, it's limitless, right? They can do whatever they want, and they can just issue an edict, and that's just the way it is. They really need to be roped in. If they want to make a decision in their district about whether something happens or not, okay, I'll buy that. But this nationwide stuff, and everybody can second guess the president no matter what, I don't get it. And I hope that there's some kind of reform. I hope the Supreme Court, reins them in or sets some parameters.
The House, of course, can be impeaching some of these folks too.
But there's got to be some kind of parameter set because you can't function this way. And anyway, I find it not just frustrating. I find it. It's unlawful in my view. I mean, you talk about the law and carrying out the law and fulfilling the constitutional role. It seems to be very deliberately disruptive for partisan political reasons. Not because there's some big moral or legal question. Not because you're saying whether someone should be put to death or not, or some grave, fundamental constitutional question. This is more, I don't like your policy, so I'm going to do whatever I can to screw you. And I think it's very dangerous. I really do. As we slide towards the end here, I just want to give you an opportunity. What is some of the most important work? There's the Doge files you just talked about. But hit on a couple of other big issues that Capital Research Center is working on and that folks should be aware of, and then tell them where they can find you and your work.
Sure. One of the things I am most proud of is our website, influencewatch.org. And that is very simple. It is a Wikipedia of the left, is the way you can think about it. It looks and reads like Wikipedia, massively footnoted. You know, we don't say anything in public that we can't document.
Sure.
And that is, as I said, to be fair, once in a while on Twitter, I'm shocked that Twitter isn't 100% reliable for every tweet, but that's amazing somehow. But, you know, there are people who get things wrong. On that.
Oh, I have a great example. When you get done, I'll give you an example.
So if you're not sure, Influence Watch can often help you on that sort of thing. Although you will lose 5 hours, you'll go down so many rabbit holes when you first discover that. I'm very proud, by the way. Lots of staffers on the Hill use it to vet all the Democrat witnesses and track the bad guys. So that's one big thing. Another big thing is we have one of the world's best counter-extremism experts, Ryan Morrow, who is doing magnificent reports, fully documenting how many of these groups that, you know, your mainstream media types are happy to call up for a quote in a story and not appreciate, like, you know, they flatly endorsed Hamas, right?
Yeah.
You know, maybe if you're going to quote them, maybe it's worth mentioning that they've endorsed Hamas. So he's doing magnificent work on the 150 or more lefty groups in the country that just support terrorism, not criticize Israel, support terrorism. That's an important thing, especially since they're active on so many of you know, if you have kids in college, their college campus probably has some of these wonderful folks on them.
Propagandized, no doubt.
Yeah, so that's another big one. And then I would just say that our main website is capitalresearch.org, capitalresearch.org. You can go up and sign up for our twice a month little e-newsletter that it's not a money-begging letter, here's just the high points of our research in these past 2 weeks.
The latest news.
Yeah, and it's more than anybody. I can't consume it all, so nobody in your audience will be able to. But you'll definitely find lots of exciting, interesting things.
That's great. That's very good. So here's a fun story for we talk about fact checking and details. You will recall that there was a claim that USAID is going to send $50 million to Gaza for condoms. And then that was debunked. No, that isn't true. So here's a little fun fact for you. This is down in the details. $83 million was sent to Mozambique for various sexually transmitted disease, et cetera, et cetera. Well, did you know that there's a province in Mozambique that's called Gaza?
No, but I had heard some of this because Musk got some pressy tried to hammer Musk with this, and Musk said, "But you know, I'm not sure that most Americans think we need to be sending tens of millions of dollars of condoms anywhere." Exactly
right. And so, but that is sort of the fun little down in the footnote. So, actually, it's 83 million. It's not 50. And it was to Mozambique, and the reason why Gaza got confused in the mix there is that one of the principal provinces or districts within Mozambique where the money went also has the name Gaza. So that will thoroughly confuse everyone even more. But that just gives you an example of how kind of half reporting, half poor follow-up, no details. But that's the reason why that even came up to begin with. But as you pointed out, why are we sending hundreds of millions of dollars out the door to begin with? Who knows, right? Listen, Scott, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I know our audience loves this kind of stuff, so we appreciate all the good work that you're doing in Capital Research Center and your colleagues there.
Well, always great to be with you, Chris.
Thanks very much. I'm Chris Farrell, on Watch.